Hello everyone, I am Juhzar B, and today we will be discussing the third space dilemma in today's society. Let's start this off with the park problem. What even is a park? In America, Yosemite National Park, Point State Park, and your community park are all considered, well, parks. This is lazy on the behalf of American infrastructure designers, and no, I do not mean the Department of the Interior.
No one hears the word they say. Has the memory gone? Are you feeling numb? Not a word they say, but a voiceless crowd isn't backing down when
Why is this lazy, you might ask? Well, think about Halloween. Think about what you got. Let's say you got Twix, you got Skittles, Reese's Cups, the whole shtick. But American infrastructure would say you got candy. Well, yeah, but this is kind of non-descriptive. It doesn't seem lazy, just a little semantic mistake. Well, you go to school the next day, and man, is lunch booming. Now you got a couple of pieces of candy you want to trade, so you sit down at your table and you whip out your lunchbox. Now just imagine, what happens if you say to your fellows, I want candy, and I'm willing to give you candy for it. They look at you and they ask you if you're going to ride a short bus home today. You whip out the Milky Way and you said, I will trade this for a piece of candy. So good old Jimbo across from you pulls out a bag of M&Ms and slides it across the table. You start to sweat because you're allergic to red dye. No, I want candy, actually. So Jimbo cuts you loose and swaps out the Skittles for a Charleston Chew. You take it, but you were really hoping for a Malaco. The problem is, when you don't have the words, you ostentiously don't have the choices. So back to our parks. I would call Yosemite a conserve and not a park. But what exactly does this mean? Well, I would like to define conserve as a subset of the term of park, and below I will define more subsets of this term for you. A conserve is a vast swath of land that is prohibited from permanent settlement, but people are allowed to enter to sightsee, and typically these exist with areas of low population in order to keep the sanctity of the nature in this area to be preserved. In these, you can see any kind of wildlife, and nature is largely untouched. Now we get to Commonwealth, which is a sizable chunk of land owned by your town. And unlike in conserves, the people of the town can do whatever they want to these commonwealths, like harvest wood or grow their own vegetables. Think about the woods you would play in growing up, a place where you would go to have fires with your friends. Nature in these places is not fully untouched, and typically the only paths in these are dirt paths and the occasional gravel road. So while it's not complete immersion in nature, it has minimal human development within them. A garden is a small piece of land which is usually fully developed. In contrast to conserves or commonwealths, these places serve as areas of high population density like cities, and usually have structures like fountains or pathways within them that are paved. Gardens are made for man's conquest and cultivation of earth and nature. These gardens serve as the purpose for citygoers to want to walk away from the usual streets and buildings and relish in nature's beauty. All of these share characteristics such as the government, whether local or federal, owning them and being a place where man can freely interact with nature. But putting something like Yellowstone National Park and Central Park under the same umbrella is kind of counterintuitive, don't you think? You wouldn't take your kid after school to the Grand Canyon and play for a bit, and you wouldn't take a tour around a playground. So if our government is this lazy at naming natural third spaces, how much do you think they care about third spaces in general? Now, in order to discuss the true crisis of the third space, we first need to define it. If you look up the definition of it on Wikipedia, you'll get a simpler answer of it being a nice place to socialize that's not your home or work or school. But this definition doesn't do the justice to the value of it. Think about it. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you go downstairs to have breakfast with your family, and this is your first place, where you primarily interact with your close relatives. So then you get ready to go to work, and you have some chit chat with your coworkers. This is your second place, where you mainly socialize with people who happen to work at the same place you do. In both of these examples, socialization is not made out of a want. You interact in these people only because you have to. This is where the idea of the third space comes in. When you just want to chill out and hang out with the boys, you ask them to go to some place like the arcade or the park and meet up there and have a good time. Or if you want to study with some college buddies, you'll call them up to the local library or a coffee shop. The third space is your key to social interaction with the people you want to interact with. For spaces so crucial for society, where are they? Commercially, we have a rich environment where someone with a solid social circle could never get bored. We have coffee shops, multitude of malls, arcades, cartridge clubs, hell, even barbershops. But even with all this, why is there such a generational disconnect between boomers and the younger generations when it comes to socialization? Why do they always just tell us to go out for the day? But the right answer to this would be, to where? With who? My friends got jobs and I gotta save my week's spending on gas. What they aren't telling you is to look for a spot that's free and there are strangers you can socialize with. But the problem with this is, these don't exist anymore because our society has become more antisocial. There are practically no more town events, and when there are, none of my friends are there. For free spots, there's no spot under 40 miles that isn't privately owned, or guarded by ring cameras and such. All I have is public property which boils down to the community park, which, while yes, it's free, it's mainly meant for children. And while there is a community pool, that costs money too. And nobody even goes to the local library anymore because nobody really bothers to read books anymore. If you said that to a boomer, they probably would have walked away after the second sentence. One word changes the meta from the elder generation to the new one: digitalization. The world now runs off of phones and computers. The boomers grew up in a world where socialization came from natural interactions. You wake up and go to the store and go see Mr. Williams working the counter, as he did your whole life. You go to work with the same crew you did for the last 10 years. For dinner, you take the kids to the only diner in town and get served by Beth. Now in these days, people live in digital reality where a job is at their house, and the coworkers might as well be chatbots. People shop online, they talk online. They have more loyalty to corporations over people. The cultural shift towards digitalization has affected the socialization of millennials and Gen Z, as it has not only made real-life social interaction harder, but it has also made these interactions not as impactful as they should be. The first step we can take to fix this problem would be by getting the government to provide more public third spaces, for which can be advertised as spots for hanging out, and ad campaigns will be launched to promote them. Laws could also be introduced to limit the efficiency of major tech functions to encourage more IRL interaction. If we look at some of the reasons Europe still has many third spaces, despite them having close to the same amount of technological advancement as us, we can find it is due to their fundamental urban design and also due to their cultural differences between us. We can use them as an example for what the future of third spaces could look like. For this next part of the video, we will be going over a catalog of third spaces that can be implemented into public life. If you or anyone you know is an architect or a building engineer, please watch the following and maybe suggest some of these structures in your career. Man is inherently at war with everything not of him, so the categories of third spaces are in accordance with the types of conflict man can have. You have natural, where man can interact with nature; civil, places where people can interact with governments; religious, places where man can interact with God; populous, where man can interact with men; and corpus, places where man can interact with their body. Furthermore, these third spaces can be divided up in what kinds of areas they can exist in, like suburban, urban, or rural. For natural rural third spaces, we have conserves, reserves, hunting land, and observatories. Conserves are places where the land is protected and the geography is preserved. Reserves are almost the same thing as conserves, however, reserves have a lot more wildlife within them. Hunting land and reserves look pretty similar. However, in hunting land, of course, you can hunt animals legally. Observatories are places usually on hills, which are far away from cities, in which man can connect with the stars. For religious rural third spaces, you have chapels and sanctuaries. Chapels are sites with small structures dedicated to a saint or general prayer, while sanctuaries are land marked with religious value. For suburban natural third spaces, we have commonwealths, gardens, docks, ponds, and spring houses. Commonwealths, as we said before, are common spaces of land in which the community can pull the resources from. Gardens are man's cultivation of nature and includes outdoor structures. Docks, such as public docks, can be used to fish, to launch boats, or used to mark off sections of water for swimming. Ponds are either used to hold decorative koi or to be used for model windboats, or even fishing. Spring houses are public pavilions where spring water are meant to be collected or swam in. An example of such could be Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. For suburban civil third spaces, we have memorials and libraries. Memorials being statues, monuments, parade fields, and flag yards, which are large lawns with many flagpoles, old forts, old homes, or settlements. Similar to a garden, however, they serve a more civil purpose. And libraries, as we all know, are just your local repository of knowledge. For suburban religious third spaces, you have churches. The church is a bind and mortar that connects the community. For suburban corpus third spaces, we have sports fields, pools, gyms, and the playground. For sports fields, I'm not talking about those big stadiums national teams play on. No, I'm talking about your community things. Think of your local deck hockey rink, your local baseball field. In these places, local community members can play on them. And of course, everybody knows what a pool is, which are just treated water places that are meant for swimming. And gyms, in the traditional sense, are outdoor training centers made for the public, and playgrounds are areas where the young can play. For suburban populous third spaces, you have amphitheaters, which are public use theaters that are usually outdoors. For the urban natural third spaces, you have your community gardens, you have your wharfs, you have your conservatories, and you have your zoos. For the community garden, it is conceptually similar to the Commonwealth. However, due to a lack of space, it's mainly used for gardening. Wharfs are these massive ramparts for which lines the banks of rivers, and usually made for large ships to pull right up. Conservatories are where man's hubris grows. They're massive greenhouses made for tropical plants to grow up north, also akin to aviaries. Zoos are places where man has contained nature, and man can view it to its pleasure. For urban civil third spaces, we have basilicas and citadels. Basilicas are these massive cathedral-like structures, but they contain imagery from your society's past, such as statues of heroes, and the whole purpose of which is to discuss politics in a public setting. Citadels are your part of the city which are behind the walls, and typically these areas are the old part of the city. For urban religious third spaces, we have cathedrals, which are massive churches with expansive architecture. For urban corpus third spaces, we have baths and stadiums. Baths are large public pools that have untreated spring water or fresh water. These massive pools are meant for bathing. No, not like a clean yourself off with the bubbles. It's the act of covering yourself in water, wading through it, floating in it. Baths also include a fountain into your system, and baths also maintain a small aquatic life such as minnows. Stadiums are where your big teams play at. These are massive complexes that host events on the scale of cities. The main difference between these and sports fields is that you are the viewer in stadiums. For urban populous third spaces, you have forums, grand stations, and stoas. Forums are the town square meant for commerce. Like German towns, ideally a church on one hand, town hall on the other, shops like the marketplace, and individual stands set up on the inside. Grand stations are your stations and airports that are public centers that are meant to convey the industrial strength of a city and provide a brief culture of it and the artistic values of the city. Stoas are the ancient Greeks' idea of a mall, however they are owned by the government and they are made to be more like a town center. I hope this video was informative to you, and now you understand what third spaces are and why they are important. And with that, that concludes today's episode of Gridlocked.